Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this seminar series, The Future of Taxation in the EU, organized by the European People's Party and hosted by MEP Isabel Benjumea. Today, as you know, we are holding the first seminar of this series, in which we will focus on tax simplification for our post-COVID EU. As you also know, next Friday, December the 11th, we will discuss green taxation, and the following Friday, December the 18th, will be about digital taxation. You have received this information by email, but we will make sure to send you a reminder for each of these seminars. As noted in the invitations you received to take part in this seminar, we will follow the Chatham House rules, and it will be recorded for the purpose really of writing a discussion paper, following the discussion in the main conclusions and recommendations we come up with. I also kindly ask you to mute yourselves if you're not speaking so that there is no background noise. Okay, so the panel today is formed, as you also know, by Jacob Lundberg, Chief Economist at TIMBRO, Sweden, Daniel Bunn, Vice President of Global Projects at the Tax Foundation, US, Aleksander Łaszek, Vice President and Chief Economist at Civil Development Forum, Poland, and Otto Brøns-Petersen, Chief Analyst at the Center for Political Studies, or CEPOS, from Denmark. About the structure, they will speak for about 10 minutes each, and then we will open the floor to discussion with the rest of participants. But first, let us hear a few welcoming words from Professor Francisco Cabrillo and Gabriel Elorriaga. So, Professor.
Okay, now, thank you, Juan Angel, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Fundación Civismo, let me welcome you to this seminar on tax simplification in the European Union, organized by the European People's Party. I think it's an honor for us in Civismo to collaborate with the EPP. I hope that this meeting will be the first step to a closer relationship. Being Civismo Foundation dedicated basically to promoting the values of freedom and the market economy, taxation and public finance have always been topics very relevant, both in our research agenda and in our activities in public policy. Let me remind you that just 102, I think, years ago, the great Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter wrote a very important paper that he called The Crisis of the Tax State. In this article, Schumpeter pointed out that the state in a capitalist system may face serious internal contradiction. And one of the most important is, of course, the crisis of its public finances. Several are the causes of this crisis, but a very relevant one is that tax revenue may be not big enough to financing the many and increasing services that taxpayers demand to the state. Well, this is 2020, but for me it's clear that the crisis of the tax state is also a problem today. And the pandemic has further aggravated this disequilibrium, since it has increased the demand for public spending on the one hand, and has reduced the revenues that the state can get from its taxpayer on the other hand. So I think it makes sense now to discuss the crisis of the fiscal state in the 21st century. But there are many relevant questions related to this topic. For instance, what should taxation be like in the next decades? We don't know really. Does it make sense to maintain the fiscal model developed in the 20th century, in the second half of the 20th century, which poses so many problems? What role should direct and indirect taxes play in the model? What should be the limits of tax rates, both in personal and corporate taxation? Does it make sense to have among our taxes wealth taxes, as we have in Spain now? How to design the new taxation, green taxation or digital taxation, or a very important issue for Europe and for my own country also. What should be the role of harmonization versus tax competition in the European Union? All these questions are relevant. And I am sure that this seminar will be very useful for all of us. And hope we will be able to find new ideas for the new problems we'll have to deal with in the next future. So thank you very much for being here. And let's begin the seminar.
Thank you, Professor. And now Gabriel Lorriaga, MP, will also say a few words.
Oh, very few words. No? I think that it's very interesting in this moment to maintain this seminar, these 3 seminars, no? Because probably things are accelerating a lot from the tax point of view in Europe in the next months and years. No? Probably in the Union, when the Commission mainly, when they speak about tax simplification, really they are speaking mainly about administrative cooperation, exchange of tax relevant data, ways to combat the tax avoidance or the tax evasion. Really, the problem for the tax administrations, the national tax administration nowadays, is not the model, is not if you can define what is the best way to tax people in the European Union, the main problem is how you obtain the incomes that you need for the growing budgets that you have. No? So I think that we can speak about many things in these 3 weeks, but it's very important, I think, to have or to try to create or to begin to think about an European model of taxation. We all know that our main idea is that the taxation is a national competence, but it's the immediate reality that new tax figures will be appear in the European scenario, that we have to integrate these new figures with the national figures, and we have to compone a logical and coherent model of taxation in the different levels of administration. In Spain, the question is very clear, and this is my last thing. It's very clear because we have a very complex internal model with different levels of administration, with capabilities of taxation in all of them. We have recently created a national digital tax and also a Tobin tax or something similar in the national level, because the government has decided not to wait to an OECD or European Union agreement. So we begin next year to tax by ourselves these activities, and the model, the general model, is really not clear at all. What you pretend and how you can combine all these different tax level administrations and many different tax figures with an efficient and fair tax model in the European area. No? So I think at the moment it's very interesting. I think that this is the one of the main questions for the next months and years in the European level. So I think that will be very useful for all of us, this discussion in the seminar. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Elorriaga. Let us start then with the panel. And our first speaker today, Jacob Lundberg. After his presentation, we will follow with Daniel Bunn, Aleksander Łaszek, and Otto Brøns-Petersen. Jacob, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Juan. I'm glad to be with you. Let's see if I can manage to share my screen again. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Yeah. Exemptions in the EU VAT. You see my presentation. Yeah. So I'm going to speak mostly about the VAT. Let's see if I have time to dig into the corporate income tax and the general income tax as well. And I'm going to focus mainly on exemptions in the VAT and why they are a problem. So let's start with what is the VAT? Well, it's a tax on consumption, and that's accomplished by levying the tax at each stage of the production process in proportion to the value added created at that stage. So each producer receives a credit for the taxes paid on inputs that they purchase, and then they levy VAT on the goods that they sell. So the final effect of this is that the full burden falls on the final consumers of this product. And this is similar to the sales tax, which they have in the US, for example, but the difference is that you have this chain-like structure of the VAT. So it's collected in stages rather than at the very end when it's sold to the final consumer. And this has proven to be a much more robust construction compared to the sales tax, which Europe also had before introducing the VAT about 50 to 70 years ago. So as taxes go, I would say this is one of the best ones, actually, because it is, if it's well constructed, which I'll dig into, and it is not very distortionary, and it's robust to tax evasion. So digging into well, first, before we go into the exemptions, for how does this chain work? So here I use the Swedish VAT rate of 25%. So we have a farmer who sells some wool to a store for 40 euros plus VAT of 10 euros. So the farmer remits these 10 euros to the tax agency. But then the store receives a credit for the 10 euros of inputs, taxes of inputs that they paid. And then they sell, say, a woolen sweater to a final consumer for 100 euros plus VAT, which then they remit to the tax authority. So, of course, the final effect is that the tax authority receives the 25 euros in VAT paid for by the consumer, but in relation to the value added at each stage. So the value added by the farmer and the value added by the store. And in this case, as you see, all transactions are taxable. But then the problem is when you have exemptions. So if a sector is exempt from the VAT, then firms that are in that sector, they don't register for the VAT. So they don't charge VAT on sales, but they don't receive the input tax credit either. So practically they are final consumers. They pay VAT just as well as private persons do. And this causes the VAT chain to break. So the VAT becomes in effect a business tax. And I'll go into two cases on how the economic effects of this. So the first example is when it's the final producer that's non-taxable. So for example, we have an insurance company here that sells an insurance service to a final consumer. And then the insurance company in turn has some contractor buys security services or IT services or something like that for 40 euros plus 10 euros of VAT. And the insurance company has to remit that to the tax authority, but it's hidden VAT, which is paid by the final consumer. And then the other case is when it's the intermediate producer, which is non-taxable, and then it becomes actually taxed again. So even though the pre-tax price here is 100 euros, you see the final price for the consumer is actually 137 euros, because you have VAT here in the initial stage paid by the consultant, and again here you have VAT on the full price of the product when it's sold to the final consumer. So the consequences of VAT exempt, just to sum it up, you have under taxation when the exempt sectors are selling to final consumers, and you have over taxation when you have exempt sectors selling to other firms. So you have a distortion of consumption, and we don't want that. And also we have in-house bias. So the insurance company in this case prefers to do these services in-house rather than buying them from other firms. And that's also another distortion that we don't want. So the EU has quite a long list of exemptions because it's an old system of VAT. So it was introduced in the 1970s. So a lot of services were placed outside the VAT. And I won't have time to go into these now, but there are, for example, insurance, banking, all kinds of financial services are basically outside, not covered by the VAT. The whole public sector, education and healthcare, etc. And I think New Zealand is an example that you should look to for inspiration when it comes to broadening the tax base for the VAT. So I think I'll stop there, and I won't be able to take part in the Q&A session, I'm afraid, but I thank you for the opportunity to give this presentation.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Perhaps you could share the PowerPoint presentation with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
That would be super helpful. Well, thank you very much.
I'll try and stop my screen sharing. You still see my screen, right? I can't seem to turn it off.
Okay, so Jacob, do you know how to stop sharing your screen? Okay. Perfect. So, Daniel, whenever you want.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Thank you for Civismo for inviting me, and the EPP for organizing this. I'm Daniel Bunn, Vice President of Global Projects from the Tax Foundation. Tax Foundation is a think tank based in Washington, D.C. So I have the privilege of having an external view to the EU tax policy debate. And I think one of the main things that I think about when considering the future of tax policy in the EU is the impact that tax competition has had and likely will have in the coming years. The crisis, as mentioned earlier, is going to have, or is having, an impact on revenues, and countries will come out of the crisis looking for ways to patch up budget gaps. They'll look for new investment opportunities, attracting capital, and also attracting workers. And these various pressures come down to what the countries and potentially the EU as a whole decides as far as the direction of tax policy. For revenues, countries may try to get to rely on the EU budget for continued support, or push for taxes on foreign companies or energy sources, trying to shift the tax burden in a new direction. For investment, countries may be tempted to double down on what I would like to say are approved incentives like patent boxes or special deductions schemes for research and development or green investment. And for attracting workers, countries, some of them have already, in a way, self-identified and said that they're going to have special schemes to attract foreign workers, basically saying, hey, in this new economy, workers are even more mobile than they have been before. Why don't you move to one of these nice islands in Southern Europe and pay lower taxes for a while? And these pressures can lead to a lot of complex proposals. Tax systems are not really well suited for one-off proposals or one-off incentives or one-off levies on different industries. In fact, you end up, if you take that route with special incentives for certain activities or special taxes on certain industries, you're going to end up with a really complex and overly burdensome tax system. So when I think of what has been going on recently, that was mentioned earlier as far as Spanish tax policy decisions with the new Tobin tax, as it was mentioned, and the digital services tax, these are essentially excises on these different industries. And again, tax systems are more efficient and effective at raising revenue when you think broadly about the different tax heads: individual income tax, corporate tax, and consumption tax, rather than trying to create narrow and special privileges, either special taxes on certain industries or special privileges. So how do countries, or how should countries, solve for both revenues and growth without facing these pressures to go down these specialized tax routes? Well, the first thing I would say is to really, truly focus on simplification for tax systems. On corporate taxes, look at the cash flow tax system that Estonia and Latvia have in place. On VAT, take exactly what Jacob just recommended and look at broad-based VATs with lower rates that not only avoids the distortion in consumption patterns, but it can also avoid some of the high burdens of compliance with VAT. If you're a store, that's selling some goods that are lower rated or potentially exempt, you're having to comply with all these different rules. And of course, the EU and a lot of EU countries have tried to digitalize these systems so it's all automatic and lower compliance costs, but still, it makes much more sense to have a broad-based VAT and essentially potential for lower rates to raise similar amounts of revenue. And then, reduce incentives for workers and investors to go abroad. Wealth taxes, high marginal tax rates, all of these things impact decisions of workers and investors of where they live, where they invest. And instead of creating special systems for attracting a certain class of workers or things like that, just make sure that your approach is simple and broad-based, and it's available for anyone. Now, competitive pressures can lead to these simplification outcomes. We see that a lot, and again, in Northern Europe. But competitive pressures can also lead to that other route that I mentioned, which is more complicated incentive schemes, pressures on Brussels to rewrite the rules for everyone. And it's really this tension between allowing countries to innovate and hopefully move towards simpler taxation versus higher tax countries and some countries that have complicated systems, putting pressure on Brussels to make everybody move up to that level of complexity. Now, certainly there is potential for some policies to come from Brussels to simplify things, as Jacob was mentioning. Some of these VAT changes probably should come from Brussels to make sure the internal market and the VAT makes sense and is easy to comply for businesses that work across borders. But some taxes in Europe are always going to be, or I expect them always to be, decided at the national level. And it's incumbent on countries to think about the incentives that are baked into their system, the way that tax policy can just be overly complex, and the way to move towards simplification while also having an eye on revenues and growth. Whether at the end of this decade tax competition will be alive and well, or if it'll have been stamped out by rules either from the OECD or from Brussels, it will still be part of the game because countries will still be competing for these mobile factors, even if tax is no longer a tool. But tax should be a simple, neutral approach rather than something that's getting focused on particular industries or sectors. And there's a way to think about tax that is both pro-growth and supportive of country revenue needs. And with that, I'll turn it back to Juan Angel.
Thanks very much, Daniel. Very, very interesting indeed. So let us now hear Aleksander.
Hello, thank you for invitation. I will take on thoughts already mentioned by both Jacob and Daniel, but I will try to focus more on what can be done at EU level and what should be done at country level. We should start with the observation that EU member states, among EU member states, are both countries that are ranked as having the best tax systems in the world and the worst. Maybe not in the world, but among OECD countries. I'm referring here to ranking prepared by Tax Foundation and Daniel with his colleagues. So even looking at less complicated measures, like just how long does it take to fill in the taxes, we see huge variation in EU. And what is important, this variation is not only in taxes that are decided at the national level, like corporate income tax or social security contributions, but also in value-added tax that is regulated by EU, but still the same value-added tax regulated by European Union. In Poland, it takes more than 150 hours a year for a company to fill in tax returns. In Estonia, it's about 15 hours. So within the same system, you can have good implementation and bad implementation. Unfortunately, Poland is an example of country with very, very poor implementation of EU directive. Our government loves gold plating. Here you can see a simple example of mandatory disclosure regime. How it was implemented in Poland. It was not only designed in such a way that Polish taxpayers must fill in much more information that the directive requires, but also penalties in Poland are out of scale. But still the government is saying that we are just implementing EU directive. So this is the problem with the implementation of EU directives, and my main message from this part is that the solutions are usually at national level, not EU level. Still, however, there are topics that should be covered by Brussels. In public debate in Poland, I'm always struck how much attention is given to EU funds and how little attention is given to benefits of single market, which is the main growth engine of European Union. Of course, smaller countries benefit more from it, but Poland, without the single market, Polish GDP would be about 10% smaller. So how does it connect with taxes? When it comes to single market, it's still distorted by problems with value-added tax. The current system was designed 27 years ago as a transitional regime. A few years ago, European Commission started a value-added action plan, a value-added tax action plan. There was some progress made, but still we are not moving toward a definitive value-added tax system. Why such a move would be beneficial for all? It would enchase working of single market, helping smaller companies to trade across the border. It could also cut value-added tax gap and the tax fraud. And also, we can use better new technologies to make the system simpler. Jacob already mentioned this point, but I will stress once again that value-added tax is among most growth-friendly taxes. All other taxes are usually much more distortive, and in the long run, we would like to tax consumption and not the work or investment. So, to sum up my points, majority of tax problems are created at the national level, not at the Brussels level. Of course, value-added tax reform is very complicated. It's not a coincidence that for more than a quarter of a century we have transitional regime, because agreeing on a definitive system is hard. But I think that this is the last crisis is the good opportunity to start again talking about the definitive value-added tax regime in EU. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Aleksander. And last but not least, let us hear from Otto. Otto, the floor is yours. Please, Otto, remember to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Yes. And that's even more important because I don't have a slide show to share with you. Just my voice. But good afternoon. I'm delighted to join you for this important conference. I think what I'm going to say today might sound a little bit contradictory, because on the one hand, I think that tax policy is extremely important for the post-corona period we are facing in Europe. On the other hand, I don't think that there's much tax policy can do in terms of fiscal stimulus to alleviate the present crisis. And I think that many of the initiatives the EU is working on are going in the wrong direction. I think we should move in a different direction. But tax policy is important, and especially it is important for the long run as a structural instrument to increase economic well-being, to increase productivity, which is an important challenge in all countries. In Denmark, we have pursued tax reforms for more than 3 decades, and my best estimation is that these reforms, while quite modest, have raised our level of GDP by about 10% over that period. But we still have room for much further improvements. So tax policy is an important instrument, and especially for the long run prospects of the economy. I do worry, though, that in the short term that we are going to be left with problems of the need for consolidation after the crisis, and that many countries are going to increase taxes to close the gaps in their public finances, and that could be a wrong way to go. We should rather try to design good tax policies. And what are good tax policies? Well, I think I would start out with an important result from tax economics, sometimes referred to as the Atkinson-Stickley theorem. But basically it says that if you are only concerned with redistribution, you should only tax wages. You shouldn't tax specific commodities, and you shouldn't tax savings. So if your only concern is redistribution and financing, the public financing, you should only tax wages. You could tax specific commodities in the case where there are externalities you want to avoid. But that's the role of taxes or excise duties. That is to deal with externalities. But basically, what this means is that for our present purposes, is that I think it's very important to reduce the corporate tax. Corporate taxes are actually is an indirect way of and a very inefficient way of taxing wages. It taxes wages by reducing productivity rather than taxing wages directly. So the corporate tax is especially in an open economy is not an efficient way of taxing. So we should move forward. By the way, we have by the route we have followed for a long time, reducing corporate taxation and preferably getting rid of it in the long run. I think that's the most important step you could take to stimulate the long-term growth would be to reduce corporate taxation and so that's one important thing point. I do agree with what has been said about the VAT. It's and actually, if you have a broad-based VAT, luckily our VAT is quite broad-based. But if it is broad-based and has one rate, it will actually work as a tax on wages. It is if it is a tax on wages in that case, but that so it's not a consumption tax. It's really a tax on wages if you have it broad-based. So I think that's what. And then of course you should not only reduce the corporate taxes. You should reduce all taxes on savings and capital. And I'm speaking from Denmark, where we have some of the highest taxes on savings and very unequal tax rates. So that would be a important concern for us. If I look at the EU agenda, the Commission has been trying for a number of years now to push the idea of a common consolidated corporate tax base. And originally the idea was to simplify the way the businesses or large corporations made their taxes, and to that extent that it might be a good idea if it was voluntary as it was supposed to be. But I worry that this is going to be a venue for an EU tax or corporate taxation, and I also worry that this is going to stand in the way of what we need, which is healthy tax competition, which should actually be encouraged. And again, speaking from a smaller country in periphery of the EU, is important to have the opportunity to lower your tax rate when you take part in tax competition. If you have a minimum tax rate, that would be it wouldn't be beneficial, but it would mostly be, to the extent it would be beneficial, it would be beneficial to large central economies, not marginal ones as we are. So I think that's very important. I worry about the attempts to introduce digital taxes, which are basically is a protectionist measure from the EU. I think we should go in the other direction to try to reduce protectionism. This is going in the wrong direction. There's nothing special about digital firms. So the problems relating to the fact that most of the revenue from digital firms end up in the US is not strange. We have a large pharmaceutical industry in Denmark, and even if they sell most of their products abroad, they pay most of their taxes in Denmark. It has to do with the logic of the tax system, present tax system. So there's nothing new about that. I think it would be a dangerous road to go down. I also worry that as has already been mentioned, that we might end up with a financial transaction tax. The attempts have been made a number of times, but I see as the budget becomes tighter in the EU, the interest might increase, and that's not a good tax. It's a bad tax. It's a tax on transaction, not on income. And if you want to raise taxes, you should do it another way. Finally, if I could just mention one thing where I think is an important role for the EU is on climate policy, and I think we need to have a reform of the emission trading system, and in relation to that, we need to have a better basis for comprehensive carbon taxes in member countries, rather than the command and control policies, which are becoming increasingly popular, even in Brussels. So I think that's important. That not to have an EU tax on carbon, but to have a framework which makes it possible for individual member countries to use the price system rather than direct regulation as much as possible in their green policies. So these are my comments for now. Thank you very much.